I believe we're live on YouTube. Yes, it's loading. Welcome to the kickoff of the month of discovery at the University of Connecticut. My name is David Noble. If you don't know me, I'm the director of the Worth Institute. At University of Connecticut, we have really turned the corner and made a significant contribution to building out the ecosystem at UConn, and we're seeing evidence of that success everywhere we go. This is second month of discovery. Last year was the first one. We were lucky enough to do it live. Our first guest speaker was a gentleman by the name of Scott Case, the founding CTO of Priceline.com and a UConn alum. This year, we're taking a little bit of a different turn, and we're moving into a global event by inviting a great colleague and inspirational businesswoman. Her name is Dr. Cat Wallace, and I think everyone that knows me knows that I tend to get real for a little bit of a second before doing everything that we have to do. And when I met Dr. Wallace, I was introduced by a great friend. And I said, well, I had some plans for a different speaker and different things going on, but, I really need to bring this story that you're telling to the students at UConn and some of the alumni and faculty as well. So I'm going to introduce Dr. Wallace. I'm going to disappear and let her give her talk, and then I'll come back for questions and answers. We will post your questions in the YouTube chat room, and they will get to us, and we will deal with them at the end. You don't have to wait till the end to post those questions, though. Dr. Cat Wallace loves robots. She always will take over the world one day. I tend to agree with her greatly on that. She's the CEO of Ethical AI Advisory and is also the founder and director of Flamingo AI, an artificial intelligence software company based in the US and Australia. Kat is regarded as one of the most influential women in business and entrepreneurship. She's also an adjunct professor and can translate really nerdy topics into everyday language, which I've never found somebody that can talk about AI quite like this, and so I'm really excited to. And a nightclub owner, Dr. Wallace is now one of the world's most cited commentators on AI, ethics, and women in leadership. Dr. Cat is a philanthropist, a human rights advocate, environmentalist, and mother of 5. Before we begin, I have to ask, what are you not?
I am not a particularly good tennis player. That is not something I am good at.
There you go.
I've spent most of my time doing all of those other things that you mentioned, David. So yeah, not great on the odd tennis.
Well, thank you for being here tonight. I'm going to mute my video, mute my audio, and let you have your time to talk. And I look forward to chatting soon.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, David. And I'm absolutely delighted to be able to share this presentation today, which we've termed The Heroine's Journey, where we're going to examine this notion of women of power and the good men that support them. But it is important for me to, first of all, let you know that I am coming to you from Australia, and I am based at the moment on our cattle property, our farm, which is about 4 hours northwest of Sydney, which is where I normally live. And even though I am the custodian of this land at the moment, it's a 12,000 acre cattle property, it's very important for me to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that I'm sitting on today. So this is the Guringai people, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. And what is also very significant about where I am today is that during summer 2019, so that would be US winter 2019, almost 12 months ago, the devastating bushfires came through our property and destroyed the entire property, incinerated everything here. So in Australia, we lost 34 lives, 6,000 buildings. We saw the destruction of over 1 billion natural wildlife. And indeed, the picture you see on screen at the moment is me during the fires. The fires were still burning, standing in what was left of our property. And during this time of the fires, which was the first crisis, and then obviously followed by the COVID pandemic as the second crisis that Australia experienced, I did spend a lot of time analysing what crisis leadership was and whether there was any gender aspect of crisis leadership. And I'm going to talk a little bit more later on about how we really see the feminine archetype in leadership coming through as the desirable traits during times of crisis. So we'll revisit that a little later. So I wanted to start and just go back quite a few years to something that was said around 1949 by Simone de Beauvoir, where she noted in her analysis that humanity was essentially defined as male, and that man actually was the predominant way or lens that the world was looked at and regarded, and females were thought not as being autonomous, but as the other, as the subject, and not regarded in the same status or realm as being masculine or being male. So these comments were made many, many years ago. And what I'm interested in doing is a kind of exploring how those comments relate today. Are women still really and candidly regarded as the other? And what I would love to do, the way I like to do keynotes, is to be very candid, very authentic, very transparent, and very conversational. So as I'm going through this presentation, feel free to drop any questions that you have, or even just comments or thoughts that you might have based on your own experience, of other people. I'm very happy for you to challenge me as well. And when we get to the end, as David said, I'll be very happy to have some question and answer time. This is a sensitive topic. We're going to talk about the heroine's journey. We're going to talk about women and men. And even though that sounds binary, I also like us to think of the whole spectrum of gender, that I don't really now prescribe necessarily to there just being two genders. So please feel free as we go through to think about any part of the spectrum of gender. So I wanted to introduce myself a little bit more, just so you know my story and why I'm in a position where I think I can make some comments about what happens to women in business, how we relate to men, what happens when women get into power, and what are the core attributes that we really need men to sign up to in order for us to be in a better business, a better world, a better life. So my journey as an entrepreneur, as most entrepreneurs, was not really a straight line. It was definitely something quite zigzaggy, we call it in the startup world. So I actually only ever wanted to be a farmer, and hence I'm sitting here on a farm now, and wanted to be close to nature and close to animals. And so I went to an agricultural high school, then started studying agriculture at Sydney University. During my university years, I realised that most of the ag students were going on to become investment bankers and were not at all farmers. So I decided I would have a career change. Because I've been brought up as a very privileged, white, middle-class Australian, with all the benefit that brings, that I would in fact rebel against that. So I dropped out of uni after 2 years and then joined the police force. And so I worked in the cops for 4 years and did everything from general duties to being a detective and then into the prosecuting branch. And after 4 years, I thought that was kind of enough, but it was a very masculine environment. It was in our class at the academy, there was probably 150 men and about 10 women. So this was my first experience of being in what we call a hyper-masculine environment. And it was pretty tough. After I left the police force, I went back to uni. I finished my undergraduate degree, and then I started working for myself, actually, as a management consultant. And on the way through, I decided with 3 friends that we would buy a nightclub. So I also became a nightclub owner of one of the biggest clubs in Sydney. And during that time, what I realised, it was super useful having been a police officer prior to owning a nightclub. So that was a very sensible career path. And in the nightclub days, what I learned was how you need to reinvent and constantly change in order to keep people coming to your venue. Also learned what it was like to manage 500 people who were often out of control every night. So after the nightclub owner part, I went on and finished a master's degree, which I did in sort of sociology, and I focused it on Indigenous studies. And then I went on to do a PhD. And so my PhD was in the field of organisational behaviour, and my topic was the role that computer technology plays in replacing human leaders. So the role that computers would play in either substituting for the human, enhancing the human's behaviour, or in fact detracting from the human's behaviour, and the effect that it had on the subordinate or the employee. And I was one of the first academics to really study the role that human plus machine would play. Back in the day, so I finished that in early 2000s, a lot of my professors said, well, this is a bit ridiculous, computers will never be controlling leadership. And I said to them, pretty sure they will. So I was one of the first academics and authors to start talking about human plus machine. I then went on to found a couple of businesses, so a market research company called ACA Research, a human-centered design company called Fifth Quadrant, and then eventually about 5 years ago, when I could see that the artificial intelligence field was coming into maturity because the computational power was right, the level of big data we had to train the algorithms was right, and the traditional models of capital and technology and labour was starting to slow down, that I saw this was an opportunity now to invent something new. So about 5 years ago, I founded a business called Flamingo AI, and it is a machine learning company that provides financial services companies with subject matter expert brains. So the best way to think about this is we build non-biological brains that organisations such as Nationwide, HSBC, companies like this, use to either augment or replace their human subject matter experts. And 5 years ago, there was not a lot of good open source or free artificial intelligence software to use. So in fact, we built our own, and we have that patented now. And so I started the business off in Australia. Australia was well behind the US in its interest in artificial intelligence. So I brought the company to the US and set up an office in New York and also in Hartford, Connecticut. So I'm a very big fan of everything to do with Connecticut, and built the business by flying backwards and forwards, 2 weeks in Australia, 2 weeks in the US, 2 weeks in Australia, 2 weeks in the US. And as David noted, I have 5 children. So I have 2 stepsons and 3 of my own. And so the younger 2, who were sort of early teenagers at the time, would come with me if I was ever away for more than 10 days at a time. I just pull them out of school. They would come with me. They would travel around. They would sit in meetings with me. They would attend venture capital meetings with me, and then I would bring them back to Australia when I was done. So one of the things I am going to talk about today is this notion of unconventional relationships, and in particular unconventional parenting. So I founded Flamingos in Australia, then set it up in the US, and then eventually brought the business back onshore to Australia to list it on the Australian Stock Exchange. Now, at the time, that was 2016, disturbingly and surprisingly, we were the second only female CEO and female chair ever to list on the Australian Stock Exchange in all its time and history. So I was proud of that, but I was also incredibly disturbed. Where were the women? Why are there not women in tech? Why are there not the women leaders? And why are there not women who are setting up companies and listing them on the stock exchange? So that was my first big insight into something's happening here. Something is not quite right. Why are there not women in this environment, and why in technology, financial services, and the capital markets is it 99% masculine or male environment? So I set about thinking about understanding what happens to the women. And the story continues with Flamingo. So a very difficult environment to have a young startup on the ASX. So recently, after 4 years of trading, we've just sold the Flamingo business to, in fact, a consortium of fintech investors out of the US, Australia, and India, which I'm delighted about. And so now I sit on a number of boards, most of them to do with artificial intelligence. And what I bring is a new interest in ethics, so in ethical AI, because I absolutely believe going forward that the proliferation of artificial intelligence, it being the fastest growing tech sector in the world currently, $38 billion invested in AI in the last 12 months. In the last quarter, in fact, really boosted by COVID, we've seen a 20% increase in investment in artificial intelligence, really being deployed to support home-based workers and virtual communication and better analytics. So AI is a very interesting space to be in. So what I do now on the boards, the various boards I sit on, is start to look at what is responsible technology. And if you haven't seen the Netflix film, The Social Dilemma, yet, I thoroughly encourage everybody to do so. It really talks about the risk that emerging technology plays and how we need to do ethical and responsible technology. But I also, my role is to help create pathways for women into roles in tech, in AI, into the capital markets, as employees and as leaders and as board members, because we still know that there's just great underrepresentation of women in these sectors. So because of that history, and I've got a quick shot here of me and my 5 children, what I set out to do was to really look at what happens to women on the journey. Do they drop out because they've got children? Because we know a lot of women, the majority of women leave between the age of 30 and 40. Those women who are on the path to leadership roles across any sector, around that age, they drop out. Now, do they leave because they are having children? Do they leave because of other reasons? And I was very interested to research and explore this. So one of the experiences I had, which I wondered whether would be the reason why women weren't in the capital markets or weren't in technology, was my own experience in dealing with investors and shareholders and their real challenge in working with me as a female. So here are some of the comments that I've just cut out of either the newspaper, the magazines, or chat rooms around the work that I did when I was CEO of Flamingo. So on the left-hand side here, we see this article in the Financial Review where there was an interview with me where I let the journalist know that in the early stages of Flamingo, I did a roadshow around looking for investment into the company, and I was offered $1 million investment from a group of investors in Melbourne. And one of my board directors took the call and said, okay, there's a condition, Catriona, there's like one condition. And I said, great, $1 million, that's a lot of money. What is that condition? Is it revenue? Is it cost of acquisition of customers? Is it reducing the burn? What might be the condition? And the condition was the investment company would invest $1 million into the business if the female CEO took her nose ring out. So I said to my board director who took the call, no, you just can't be serious. That can't be true. And he said, oh, I'm afraid it's absolutely true. If you take your nose ring out, there will be $1 million invested in the company. So interesting dilemma. Would that have been said to me if I was a male? Possibly, but I'm not sure. Anyway, I did not take the nose ring out. You can see I've still got this one in. In fact, I had a much smaller one in. So I went out and got a much bigger nose ring and put it in because I was so incensed. How can they be judging me on my jewellery? It was quite incredible. Another comment down the bottom here was from an investor who was trying to introduce Flamingo to some other investors and said a factor which is playing a part is the fact that the CEO is female. I've introduced the company to several friends and been surprised by their reaction. So I laid out the business case in their heads. They were all nodding. Then some of them pulled up as soon as I told them the company was run by a woman. These are otherwise very sensible people, but the gender bias is very real. So here we see people not choosing to invest in the company because they were nervous that the CEO was female. Other comments here by an investor was to investors who knew that I did a lot of talking and promotion and supporting of women, was encouraging other people to dump stock because they knew that I spend time going out and supporting and promoting women. So really, really difficult. And then the final comment there was when I put a new CEO into the business and I was working to support that person and I sat on the board, this email straight away to me when we announced that we knew CEO that was good because Catriona was bloody useless. So these are the sort of things that I have experienced on my journey. And I was very interested in my reactions. So initially, back in the early days, I would get quite upset and quite hurt. And then what I developed was nothing but complete compassion. Nothing but complete compassion for these people who I believe were not aware that they probably had bias, conscious or other, or even if they were aware they had it, the damage they were doing and the difficult situation that they were creating by voicing their opinions about female leaders. And of course, in the public markets, the share price goes up and down, the market cap goes up and down. When it's up, everyone loves you. When it's down, everyone is really hard on you. And I'm very familiar and used to that journey. But what I recognized was that this added no value to anyone. And if I was to help change the dialogue, then I must come at it not from an angry, annoyed feminist, but as a compassionate person who really wanted to take men on the journey with me to understanding female leaders and why it's so important that we do move towards a position of equality in business, in technology, and in the capital markets. So that got me to looking at some other cool things. So I started studying what journeys women go on. And I know that there's been a lot written about the journey of men and the hero's journey, but not much written on the heroine's journey. So I started researching and found this great work by Maureen Murdoch, who talked in detail about what the heroine's journey is. So I wanted to share that with you today. So let me start off, and again, context and position, why we're interested in talking about this. Because it's my belief, and I'm sure many of you share it as well, that we still haven't got to a very strong position of equity or equality in leadership in particular with regard to gender. And there I also don't just mean gender binary, but gender across the spectrum. There still is a strong predominance of males in leadership roles. So in looking at the heroine's journey, I wanted to study this to see what happens to we women on our journey, and if we could complete the full journey and really step into our power, what does that look like? And the very interesting thing I started off learning about was, what is power? Why don't we have it? And what is influence? And is power associated with masculinity, and is influence associated with femininity? So again, another personal example of this, I was very, very privileged to be given one of Australia's greatest business awards or acknowledgement from the Australian Financial Review, which was called Australia's Women of Influence. So they choose the top 100 women, and then they choose different categories. And I was the top woman in the business and entrepreneurship category. And I was the top woman of influence for business and entrepreneurship. So that got me thinking, hey, what are the men's awards? And the men's awards were men of power. So we have women of influence and men of power. And I thought, wow, why aren't I a woman of power? Why am I a woman of influence? So I started looking into, what does power mean? So the definition of power is largely the ability to directly affect change. So power, the ability to directly affect change. Influence is the ability to indirectly affect change. Influence, ability to indirectly affect change. So even in these big national awards, already we were messaging that the men could be powerful and direct, the women influential and indirect. And I just wasn't okay with that. So in the heroine's journey, we're really looking at, what are the steps women go through typically to really get into and be in positions of power? And we see that it's quite different, not surprisingly, to the hero's journey or to men's journey. So let me take you through the 8 stations of the heroine's journey. And this is super interesting. So I love your thoughts and chats along the way. So it starts out with we women or girls. And again, I will ask your indulgence for me to use some generalizations as we go through this, because we know this journey is not for every woman or every girl. There'll be plenty of women and girls who have completely different journeys to this. So let's just go with this as kind of a generic journey and see what might resonate with each of you. And what I would love is for the women on the session with us today to really think about if any of these particular stations resonate with you, and for the men with us today to think about what each of these stations might mean for either you, where you have a woman, so a partner, a child, a sister, a colleague who you may have seen experience any of these stations. And I'd love, and I know David is super keen that we chat about this right at the end. So let's get started. So separation from the feminine. So when girls are young, they're often very, very feminine, and they will be playing with, dollies, pixies, horses, and in a very feminine archetype. As they get a little bit older, say late primary school, so 8, 9, 10, there is what we call a separation from the feminine. So this is when the young girl starts to see that all the things that her mother is doing are not as well regarded, acknowledged, or rewarded as the things her father is doing, or the males, dominant males in their life. So at that stage, she separates from the feminine and starts to identify with the masculine, even from that very young age. Then going through teenage years and into early adulthood, again, a lot of the things associated with the masculine, which might be being sporty, being having a certain level of achievement, achieving certain qualifications, getting certain career success, all of the things associated typically with the traditional masculine, the young woman starts to identify, because these are rewarded more and regarded more highly than the things associated with the feminine. And so she starts on this journey of just joining up with the masculine path. Then the next thing that happens is this illusion of success. So she might get to a certain stage and goes, okay, well, I've got my education, I've got my career, I'm in this big job, I've got my children, I'm doing what I thought was everything that I wanted, that society tells me is the right thing to do. But it's an illusion. It doesn't feel real. It's not rewarding me. I feel empty. And then she moves into the fourth station of the heroine's journey, which we call emotional and spiritual aridity, where she says, okay, I've achieved all these things, but I feel empty. I don't feel either spiritually, emotionally, mentally, even physically satisfied or alive. I feel that I'm on this path that may not have been the path truly for me, the path I thought I was meant to be on, and I'm now feeling a deep sense of more than just dissatisfaction, a deep sense of longing or missing. And we call that emotional and spiritual aridity. And that's at the time when she moves to the next station, which we call, which I love, is descent to the goddess. So this is when she might even do it without any knowledge to anybody else close to her. She goes back to think, who am I? What am I? And what happened to my connection with the feminine? Where has that gone? And this is where you start seeing women starting to go on retreats, to join women's groups, to attend women's movements, to want to be closer to women colleagues, to start to do some charitable work. And really they go down into what is truly the feminine. And then we see this yearning for the feminine. It's okay, so I've gone through this kind of masculine journey, but I really am yearning for the feminine. I want to have more women friends. I want to share my story with other women. I want women's support. And this can be quite painful, because it's here that the woman realizes that she's probably put aside her feminine self, and that's actually causing pain on multiple levels. It may have also caused her to leave the workforce, to not take a job in leadership, to want to go back and just be with her children. It might have meant all of those things. So yearning for the feminine is where she goes and spends time and wants to be with women and around women, or she wants to be with men she knows will support her in her journey and will help her step into her own power. So this is where we start seeing the good men appear. The next part of the station is the healing of this feminine self. So she goes through a healing process where she really starts to understand that her feminine self is actually an extremely powerful force. And when I mentioned earlier about crisis leadership, we know that the very essence of being a good crisis leader is a number of the attributes associated with the feminine archetype. So these are things like signal detection, to be able to detect things before they happen, deep empathy and compassion, being adept at collective action, so being able to mobilize groups, different groups of people towards an end goal, data-driven critical thinking, being able to be open to the use of new and advanced technologies, can manage political agendas, don't manage with ego, so manage without needing to have ego and reputation as at the heart of what she does. So here is when the feminine starts to heal, and into the last station where there's full integration of herself. So she's understood the masculine qualities that she's got on the right journey. She's gone back and found the feminine qualities that she knows are actually now significantly important, integrated these things, and is now ready to step into positions of power as a fully integrated woman. Now, what is very interesting is that often, and it's sometimes said to me that, you know, if I'm quite strong, I'm quite determined, and people previously have said to me, oh, I see you show a lot of, you're very masculine in your leadership. I said, no, I'm really not. I am a strong female leader. This is what we do as women. We can be assertive, we can be determined, we can be very strong-minded. That is not necessarily coming from anything masculine that I'm trying to do. That is my true feminine, womanly self. And so this is the heroine's journey. And the ultimate destination is, of course, that women step up and step out of being an influencer into being powerful and being able to direct change. Now, let's keep going and see what is a woman of power. And so I have put together these attributes based on looking at the research, based on my own experience, and based on talking to many, many women over the years. So let's have a look at what a woman of power is. So women of power are those women who look for roles with power and not just influence. They can directly affect change. And so the women of power I know do these things. They're very comfortable with being constantly uncomfortable, because it is not, being a woman of power and in leadership is never going to be uncomfortable. And if you ever get to a position of being comfortable, then you have not stretched yourself. You are not pushing the cause well enough. Be unconventional in relationships. So the women of power I know do not have conventional relationships. They do not have a traditional relationship with their partner. They do not have traditional relationships with their children, because they must be able to have their career and be in these positions of power with the support around them. So this notion of being unconventional in relationships is very, very important. The third one, I say, take your children to work. So important for women, and not all women are mothers, but for those women who are, not to be separated from each other. The greatest pain that we women have often in our work is the separation from our children, or our feeling of guilt related to not being there enough for our children. So my view is, well, if you have to be away from your children, take them with you, take them to work. As I said in my preamble, I've taken my children all over the world, taken them out of school, and they have learned a lot more in being with me in these environments than they have been just doing traditional schooling, which most of us know is pretty broken anyway. So be unconventional with your relationships, be unconventional with your children, take your children to work if you need to. The next one is really important for women. It's conquer your fears. So you have to really know yourself. Anyone in power I know has actually journeyed to the kind of the bottom of what I call the quagmire and really confronted their own fears. So a lot of women have apprehension, anxiety around powerful men. We must learn to overcome that by working with powerful men, by being compassionate towards powerful men and understanding how to work hand in hand with them. Conquer your fear of failure, conquer your fear of success, or whatever else you identify your fears are. Often these come from when we're young girls. Do work and try and overcome them. For me, I did years and years of mindfulness meditation to try and go back and look at what are my fears and how do I separate the emotion from my rational mind that I use when I'm in business. Look for where the women already are. So this is super interesting. So women are attracted to women. Women like women, and women know if there's an organisation that have women, that they're likely to have some idea how to treat, how to respect, and how to value women. So look for where the women already are. As you go forward and as you go for different roles, the women of power will insist minimum equal pay. And we still know, I think universally, the pay gap is around at least 17% lower for women than it is for men. And we must always insist on equal, or I like to think, a greater level of pay. One of the great things where we are today, where organisations are seeking out women leaders, is often we can use that to our advantage and start to actually ask for more pay than we traditionally would have. So I really encourage you to do that. Be bold, take risk, don't be afraid of failure. The most confident people that I know have had at least 3 epic fails on the way through their journey in order for them to be confident enough to be a person of power. So please take risk, please be bold. Apply for jobs you don't yet have the skills for. So this is, you will all have heard this, I'm sure, in the research about women and men. Men always apply for jobs they not qualified to do, and women don't apply for jobs that they're not qualified to do. So we must do that. We must do exactly the same as the men do and start applying and stretching ourselves, go for jobs that we don't quite have the skills yet, but we know we've got the capability to get there. Very important for women is this next one, and very much relates to what we talked about, the heroine's journey. Women are super motivated and at their most powerful when they are on purpose. Beyond commercial and typical usual business goals, women, if they are on purpose, if they are making a difference, particularly if it's some type of a social difference, this will be when women are at their most powerful. Second last thing is, for women of power, seek out the good men. And in a minute, I'm going to talk about what the good men are. Seek out the men who will support you, who you can trust, and have them as your allies and keep them with you on your full journey. And then the last one, which is probably one of the most important aspects of a woman in power, is that women in power will always take a sister with them. So will always use their role to encourage other women, particularly younger women, to come up on the way through. So one of my big purposes in life at the moment is, in my field, artificial intelligence, leadership, capital markets, is to make sure that I clear the way for younger women to come through. Super important to me. And now we look at the good men. So good men are the men that recognise gender equality is actually not just the right thing to do, but is genuinely a part of their purpose. So here are the attributes in the men that I've worked with, looking at the research, that are associated with the good men. So the good men serve as role models to other men, and they will hold their peers accountable if they see that there is gender inequity in the workplace. They are cognizant and work on their own biases, conscious or unconscious. They will support and they will sponsor women in business and help women go through their career progression. This is a big one. There's lots of research being written about this, which when I first read it was quite disturbing. Often when men are evaluating women's performance, they do it in a different way that they evaluate men's performance. A quick example of this, when I had my first chairman's evaluation of my role as a public company CEO, I was told I was three things. As far as my performance review, I had a positive personality, I was creative, and I got on well with people. I went, what? That's things that I would say to my children. No, I raised $25 million. I set the business up in the US. I listed the company. Why am I not being evaluated in the same way? And one of the things that the research shows in this field is that men are sometimes triggered and have some fear of women when they're in these close environments where they have to evaluate their performance. There is something either primal or from their background that is uncomfortable when they are doing performance evaluations of women. So not for all men, but certainly the research shows us that there is some triggering that happens. So the good men recognize their reactions may be driven by some sort of threat or even a fear that they have of women, either disappointing the women, telling the truth to the woman, upsetting the woman. These things play out consciously or unconsciously. The good men share household duties. They carry their lion's share of all the work being done at home, and that it's not just the women. They're mindful of women always being placed in nurturer roles and being the ones who are expected to be the carers. They do not participate in events or organisations where there is not women or gender generally, or the spectrum of gender represented. So whether this is on panels or events or in organisations. They hold the space so that women can communicate in their own way. We women talk very differently to men. We have typically a more roundabout way of getting to a point than a direct way. So the good men will hold the space and the women, so the women can communicate. And then the good men can also amplify what the woman's saying without mansplaining, which of course, means the men have to explain to women the things that they know about. So amplification of what the woman says, and then the good men also promote the stories of the women and help share those stories, whether it's in the organisation or whether it's on forums like this, where we women leaders get to talk about our journey, our experience, and so that not only the women but the men can learn from them. So my strong belief is that we're now at a stage where the women, we women no longer have to be the other. We no longer have to be the subject. We no longer have to be the lesser. We are not the same as men. And you can see even from the visit of the heroine's journey that that's probably quite different to the masculine journey. We are not the same, but we are absolutely equal. Thanks, David.
There we are. That was a lot of info, and I'm very appreciative of your time and thoughtfulness on walking through a lot of this. And I'll start. I know there's a number of questions, and I've been watching it in the YouTube chat and thinking through some of this. But I want to. There were two or three things that I had to ask, and one of them that just sticks in my head from the talk is, how do you know, especially if you're a young woman in these in this growing business environment, how do you know you can trust a man, right? Because there was that presumption or assumption that you can find a man you can trust, and like, how do you one allow yourself to be vulnerable, right, in that environment, but also identify the right people to be vulnerable to?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And look, we know about vulnerability. We know all of the Brene Brown's thoughts and thinking on that as a powerful person who talks about vulnerability. So I do think as a woman leader, you do need to be vulnerable. There's no question about that. I do think as a male leader, you also need to be vulnerable. So that would be around being able to share your story, share your challenges, share your goals and your dreams, and being able to do that with male colleagues. Now, my sense of trust is defined in two ways. So I see trust is character and competence. So again, trust is character and competence. So character means that the male that you might be talking to and wanting to share and wanting to identify as one of your allies, that he is of good character, and that would be by seeing what he's done. So for me, it's a lot of it is about the actions that have been shown. So the character would be, what is this person's history and how have they demonstrated already that they're supportive to women? And that could be supportive to their own wife or partner, or to their daughters, or to other women in business. So you want to see that they have some track record and their character is good. And then competence is around, do they do what they say they're going to do? Do they act on what they say they're going to do? So if they've said they will support you and help promote you, or provide opportunities, will they actually do that? So my view is that trust will come once there's been demonstrable action associated with what the good man has said he would do. So that's how I think trust is, character and competence.
So you've got a lot of questions here. And as the host and moderator, I'm not going to make you answer all and every last one, although I would if we were live. And what I want to do before we get into the students' questions, I'm going to put mine to the side because they're really good. But I want to say, it became incredibly apparent to me as you were talking through the women of power that I was raised by a woman of power, right? And where it really hit was when you said, and we've talked before, but this idea of bringing your kids to work. And I grew up on the third floor of a funeral home that my mother operated and ran, right? And like, we didn't just get, brought to work occasionally, we lived at work. And, and I think of my sister now as she's taking over the leadership of that organization, which is infinitely bigger. And she sits every day in our old living room, right? And that's where her office is. So it's pretty inspiring. Kayla asked a great question of, how do we encourage the behaviors you discussed in the good men stages with our peers and coworkers before they enter the formal workforce, right? So, being college students, I'm thinking there's a lot of behavior that happens in the college environment that mirrors the negative behavior we talked about in the workforce. And how do we start addressing that earlier?
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely necessary. So my view is, and I'd also be keen to hear from any men that we have on the session with us today. A lot of men want to be good men, that they really want to. They don't actually know what they need to do. And they're very worried if they do something, it might be inappropriate, or it might be taken the wrong way, or it might be seen as being demeaning. So you will already be surrounded by good men. And I'll guarantee most of the men who are joining us today will be good men. A lot of them won't know what it is that they need to do. So it's up for us, women, through a lens of compassion and support, to let them know, this is what I need from you. I need you to do these behaviors. I need you not to do these behaviors. I need you to look out for when you might automatically react in that way, to catch that before you do it. And then I need you to work with your other male friends and help them also become good men. And I tell you that the men that I've worked with, who I've taken them through, okay, here's kind of what we need you to do, have been so grateful, so relieved, and are actually then empowered to actually go and do something. A lot of men are frozen at the moment, and particularly on the back of Me Too and all the other movements that we, of course, as women are very supportive of, it's meant that a lot of men are nervous about actually knowing what to do. And it's completely up to us, women, to support them, understand these are the behaviors we need them to show.
You know, it's timely that you bring that up. And like, I sit here very clearly a white man, right? And, you know, I try to think of myself as a leader in inclusion and equity, right? And like, how do I help my students and how do I behave? And I find myself many times in conversations where I don't know what to even say, right? And or what to do, and the only thing, and for some of the men in the audience, one of the things I would say is the only thing I know is to be true and sincere, and you're gonna make a mistake, right? Like you don't know the experience, and I have that, you know, that fear that you're going to say something in class one day, and all of a sudden there's going to be a social media thing, and it's like, oh, I didn't mean to do that, right? Like I didn't mean
Right.
to offend someone, and so, but I mean, I for some reason have screwed up many times with what I say, but I think one of the key things is it's where it comes from, and it's clear
Right.
where things come from, I think, and that's a big deal. You know, one of the questions in the chat is, you know, do we and I'm going to take their question and change it a little bit, Shiro. I hope you don't mind. And so, well, actually, you know what? I'm going to read the question as it's written, and then I'm going to add a little bit to it. It says, "Do you think men today uh, have changed in a way towards good men, or do they still see women as a threat?" And I would say, is there a bad man? Is it a binary good man, bad man scenario, or is it something different in your opinion?
Interesting. So look, I think there has been a shift towards good men. I do. I think there is definitely more good men than there was. And I think we're on the right path, but the trajectory is very slow. We're not anywhere near where we thought we'd be in the women's movement. We're just not. And typically there's this thing about 17%, right? We're never more than 17% of boards. We don't get more than 17% of capital. We don't get more than 17% of pay gap. So it's still slow, but definitely we're moving in the right direction. So there would definitely be more good men than there was previously. Now, to your
oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Keep going.
I was going to say to your, are there bad men? I think there are bad men, and I think bad men are those who actively work against women in leadership roles, and we see these in political roles, we see these in government roles, we see these in business roles, and I do think that comes from partly some lack of education, lack of some ignorance, and possibly these bad. Well, I know these men. And let's not call them bad men. Let's just call them unenlightened men. I think a lot of them would be very happy to be able to learn how to be good men. And in fact, I have done this with men in business who've reported to me and actually taken them on that journey, painful as it was. So I think there definitely are men who work actively against women, but I think there are many who could actually and would probably be happy to help me learn about how to be a good man.
What's wrong with being old-fashioned? Right? Like, that's a question. When you go into a male locker room, it's a different conversation, and that comes up, right? And I have a few ideas as to what's wrong, but I'd like, you know, sort of your ideas.
Yeah, look, what my experience has been with old-fashioned values is old-fashioned values were associated often with just not valuing women as equal contributors. And so I had a staff member who came. He was an older, more traditional guy. He came into our business, and as a funny story to tell and you break the ice with the staff, he talked about a situation where he once had a punch up with a woman who had taken his seat at a ski resort. And I went, oh my God, how can you think this is funny? Like, this is not funny. Punching women is not funny. How is this something you think? And all my Gen Y, my millennial employees just went, oh, okay, God, this guy's got to go. And I had to try to work with him for a while, and couldn't. So then I terminated him from the company. So, those old-fashioned values, some old-fashioned values are great, but old-fashioned values associated with women not being equal to men, there's no place for them.
Yeah, I think, and I guess I'm outcome oriented in some ways, in that like better outcomes happen by treating people equitably. Like allow it, like if I don't treat women in an equitable way, how can I expect them to perform for for everybody else, right? Like in that workforce, right? Like you're only 80% as good as the person next to you, right? Like that's
Right.
that how can that possibly be? I thought there were some great points you made about reviewing women. And none of the I have to say I've never done a job review for a male. So I don't know how to review. I don't know the difference. I don't think I've ever said, well, you have a really positive attitude. Like, and I can't even imagine that it would dawn on me to say that, especially to a CEO, right? Like, so, I can't, I was totally taken aback. And when you said that, and I was trying to think through some of uh, my job uh, reviews go, and I was like, man, I hope that's not me, right? And I'll have to call everyone I work for or that works for me and say, please tell me what happens at a job review with me, right? But I think that's a great point that can be brought up in, how do you, I think there's a lot of people, like you said, that would like to be better at this and don't know what to do because we weren't trained, right? Like nobody trained you to treat women just like women. Like
Yeah.
that's the hard part. It's just treat women, like people, like humans, right? And it was always different, and that other really hits home. So you say, all right, how can I make the world a better place? And I think right there, like, expect women to do great work, and when they do great work, reward them like they do,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it's pretty simple. And I'm going to
Yeah.
mispronounce your name, Zunaira. Do you think these old-fashioned values changed as society is changing, or are they still acknowledged to this day? I mean, what was old-fashioned when I was a kid? Is that old-fashioned today, right? I mean, that's a reasonable question.
Well, let's think about what those values are. Are those values that are they the values that relate to men being better leaders? Do they relate to women being better nurturers? What are those values that we're talking about? Because I think there's enough evidence today to show, and even during COVID-19, during the pandemic, we've seen that the best results in countries of containing the virus are those countries led by women. So Finland and New Zealand, for example, where they've got strong women leaders, have come out with the best results for COVID. So I think the values, those old-fashioned values that relate to women, are just not relevant anymore. We've just got to wake people up to the fact that they're not relevant. And it's difficult often with some of the political leaders we have in our countries, where those values, we don't see them played out terribly well, certainly not in my country. So I think there's a lot that needs to be done right at the political level, right through down to the university and even at school, where these values, some old-fashioned values are useful, but the ones that were traditionally associated with gender inequality, again, I say there's no place.
Yeah, that doesn't mean romanticism is dead, right? Like, that doesn't mean that it's the workplace could be a place where we treat each other like humans, right? Like, instead of putting people in based upon gender, which at the end of the day is not hugely determinative of what is possible. There's a great engineer, a worth innovator, asking a question in here, and she says, how can I maintain certain feminine aspects of my style in a heavily male dominated field? And on top of that, she's going in, she's working in the military as well. I know. And she said, the nose ring issue, comfortable clothing, hair, makeup, like a lot of different things. There's so much more that and I think about this when I get ready in the morning and my wife gets ready. Like, the amount of things that go into getting ready to go to work are different, right? And so, how do you maintain those aspects in a dominated field? Because you know that world.
I know that world. So this is my world too. So I love I'm not an engineer, but run technology companies, and I love female engineers. These are the best people that I know. So I would say absolutely important for you to maintain the feminine side of yourself, if you're comfortable to do that. And that would be what you wear, so you don't have to wear jeans and a black t-shirt and red Converse sneakers. You don't have to eat and drink what the men do at work, because you being a female engineer, you are so valuable and important. And you may not know that yet if you're still a student or in early stage career, but at my level, where I'm on boards and leading technology companies, we want women. We are desperate to find women engineers, and we're desperate to find women of minority group engineers as well, even more. So what I say to you women engineers, your gender, your nationality, is an asset. This will be a trading card for you. You will be able to ask for more money, get better jobs, all of these things, because you are female, and the tech sector is desperately trying to find female engineers. But I don't think you need to act like the male engineers. And I know it's sometimes hard when you're in teams and they all behave that way, you kind of end up merging into them. But I would say your strong power and influence will come from you maintaining your femininity. And just be confident to do that. Just be confident to wear and express yourself as a woman, because you are in demand and your femininity is an asset.
One of the things I've noticed by Gen Z that's coming through right now is the demand for these things to change. I've never experienced it in millennial. People like to talk about millennials, and it's still not. It's definitely a more liberal in some ways attitude, but I found that millennial women were not tracking as well as their mothers even. And I see in this younger group, whether it's race, gender, ethnicity, I see them pushing forward harder. I have a question from, I think it's Yi, around how do you, when you're the CEO, you can enforce, inclusive norms in a company. You can fire people, you can reward those that are, you can punish those that are not. As a junior person in a company, company, how do you try to alter that culture in a positive way so that it is more inclusive, so that people are more accepting of these of minorities and women?
Yeah, wow, that's a great question. You very, very important. So I have this view. We've seen our politicians really not do a good job in these areas. We've seen our business leaders not do a good job in these areas. And I say the same about my field of ethical AI. We don't see good ethics coming from the tech giants. We don't see good ethics coming from the politicians or government. So I think on these things related to gender, to race, to ethics, that it is you people, it is all of us on this session today who must step in and become leaders. Even if you're not in an authoritarian or positional leadership, you can become what we call an informal leader. So I would suggest that you really do some self-reflection and think about what are your values, what is important for you at work, and if it is around gender or racial equality or ethics or promotion and treatment of women, then you really bring that into your role and you go and talk to your manager about the fact that this is very important to you and that you would like to see some programs or actions or initiatives taking place, and then you step up and offer to lead them. So whether it's a session that you watch a film together about gender equality, or you get a speaker in to come and speak, or you introduce something into the meetings that you have to make sure that there's no poor communication around anything to do with gender or ethics or anything that's important to you, and you start to lead it even from your junior position, because you'll find that your manager has probably wanted to do something, but again, doesn't have the confidence or is not sure about it. And once they know they have someone in the team that'll help them do it, they'll probably open up and go, great, yes, I've wanted to do this, this, and this. So I would really encourage all of you, you be the leader. You absolutely be the leader. Don't wait for your bosses, because it may never happen. You are the ones that can lead us through this without any question.
You brought up a great point of the demand of women engineers, and we talk about the pay issues all the time, and I encourage everyone, whether they're interviewing with me or interviewing anywhere, to ask for more money. The worst that someone's going to do is say no, right? And they can say, there's no more money in the budget for this, right? And then you got to figure out your way to get there. But especially women engineers need to be asking for more money. And that goes back to that point early, where you have to get comfortable in the uncomfortable. Most people, it's uncomfortable to have that conversation, but there are certainly that's a place where women are going to have to lead before men. Nobody's going to give you more money if you don't ask, and then there's going to come a point where you have to take it, right? And I think that's a key piece. So I've had a.
So I've got, David, can I just have a quickly
Yeah.
just comment on that? So this is my advice for the women. So if you are going for a role and you think that you deserve a certain amount of money and the money that's being offered is not as much, first thing you do is you go and research. So go and do benchmarking study, easy to get that data, and come back and make sure you've got a list of, okay, here's a similar role, and they're all paid this much. And so make sure you have that data. And then if there is, as you said, David, someone goes, oh, well, we don't have the budget for that. This is the budget. And you can't get more money, then you do something like this. You go, okay, I'll accept that for now. It's below what my value is, and I want a review in 3 months' time. And at that review, I want the extra $10,000 added if I've performed in that 3 months, and then I want my base salary shifted to then. And you give the manager 3 months, because they'll always be able to get money to go and find that. And then the other thing to do is just role play it. Find someone who's a hard-ass negotiator and sit opposite them and role play you asking for money and someone saying no, and you use strategies to get them, to convince them to say yes to you with that money. So just role play it.
Keep working, and at the end of the day, you learn how to negotiate, right? Never a bad skill to have. We've done most of this talk, and we have not gotten to AI, and we ran out of time. But being the boss, we get to do this, right? And I have to ask you this question, and we'll end it here. I'll ask the question, I'll let you end it, and then I'll let you have the parting shot. But are we running the risk right now of hardwiring in even greater inequity through AI, through data analytics, through the overwhelming reliance upon technology at this point? Because I lose sleep at night thinking about that. And then I'll let you finish. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Look, the answer is yes, David. We're in a very difficult place at the moment, and I'll explain how that works. So if we think about artificial intelligence, there's 4 components. There's the data, there's the algorithms, there's the analytics or decision making, and then there's the automation. So really the problems start at the data. So data is often sourced from big data files that are based on historical data that are used to train algorithms. So big companies, including Google and the tech giants, go and buy these data sets and then train their algorithms, or they create their own data sets. The challenge with this is that historical data is already full of terrible biases where women are often excluded. So there's a fabulous book by Carolyn Criado Perez called Invisible Women, which really maps the history of how women have just been excluded from most data sets. And it's deeply disturbing when you see it. So at the moment, organizations take historical data, train the algorithms, and then this machine, which is really going to be running our lives within the next couple of years, have already been taught that in this case women are not as important or don't feature in the data sets as much as men. So a couple of examples of this. So one is the Apple Card. So Apple released their automated AI-based Apple Card about 6 months ago, backed by Goldman Sachs, and it was trained on historical data. So when Apple released it, husbands and wives from the same family, the same financial information, applied for an Apple Card, and on average, it gave the men 10 times the credit average of the women. And that just all blew up. And even Steve Wozniak, the Apple co-founder, did it. And I think his was something like 20 times the amount that his wife got. So that is one of the examples, terrible example of bias in the code. And who's monitoring this? Nobody. Are the tech giants monitoring it? No. A quick test I get to my audience often, I either get you to Google professor style. So I'm a professor. David, are you a professor?
Occasionally.
Yeah. Right. So
occasionally, yeah.
Occasionally. So if you Google professor and just look at images and just scan through it, what you'll see is quite attractive young men in tweed suits. Right? So somebody has trained those algorithms that professors don't look like me. They look like young men in tweed suits. So this is the basic search function. Imagine that biased data going into financial decisions, police, justice, border control, surveillance, and it is. And so to me, I'm deeply concerned that the trainer's already left the station, that this bias is in the code, it is being hardwired, these machines will be running our lives within the next 5 to 10 years. So that's the first issue around bias in AI that I'm really disturbed about. Second is 90% of the jobs that will be replaced by artificial intelligence will be the jobs of women, minority groups, and youth. It'll be all the service and admin jobs initially, and that's predicted to be about 40% of jobs in financial services, tourism, hospitality, insurance, banking, telecommunications. Within the next 5 years, 40% of those jobs will be done by machines. 90% of the jobs that are lost will be the jobs of women and minority groups. So how are we going to deal with that? How are youth, entry-level university students going to step out into your first jobs when these jobs are now being taken by machines? We need to do something about that.
So let's let you say something positive to end the wonderful hour, what turned into an hour and a half. We turned an hour and 15 to an hour and a half, but I think that there's a lot to be positive about, and I'll let you own that, and then I'll thank our sponsors when you're done.
Great. Yeah. So we've talked about some difficult, even perhaps controversial topics tonight, but what is so inspiring, and I have such great hope and vision for the future, is that we can help and step women into positions of power. I think that is happening, and I think that will happen. And I'd encourage each of you tonight to go away and reflect on what is it that you can do as a woman, as a man, to help on this path, because it's such a better outcome when there is equality. So there's that. And then with AI and technology, and I know some of your attendees on the session tonight are engineers, then we've got a big job to do, right? Never before have we, as just average people, being able to be of such influence, because we are the ones designing, we are the ones writing the code, we're the ones coding it. We do have a great level of influence to make sure that we build machines that are going to run our world in an ethical way, with a removal of bias. We can actually do it. Each of you can have a role in that. And I call this stepping up to be the ethical leader. That's what we need. And the time is now to do that. And if we can all do that together, and not rely on the politicians and government and the tech giants, we can absolutely make a fundamental, purposeful difference to the world. I absolutely believe that.
So on that note, that is positive. I'd like to thank the most powerful woman in Australian business and entrepreneurship for joining us tonight. This was a true joy. Again, we are glad to be able to bring it based upon the generosity of Peter Wirth and the creation of the Wirth Institute. We've really, I think, had an impact, and will have a much greater impact on both UConn, but on the world, through conversations just like this tonight, and all the work that these students are going to be doing. So thank you. This is the kickoff of the month of discovery. If you're watching this on recording and you made it all the way to the end, congratulations. I think you really need to take advantage of this time to find yourself in the pandemic, right? It is your chance to figure out the world to the best of your ability, and it's a confusing time. And it's our pleasure to be able to share that with you. So thank you for joining us. Research Connections, the Entrepreneurship Expo, and Frontiers of Research are coming up the next couple of weeks. Please join. If you have a chance and are looking for mentorship, reach out to us at the Wirth Institute and take advantage of networks, the Wirth Coffee Chats, which are more intimate, interactive conversations where you're in the Zoom room. We're having them twice a week at this point with great leaders like Kat. So thank you, Kat. I appreciate it. And Helena, we're signing off.